Thanksgiving mornings used to begin with voices, my daughter Emily humming to herself in the kitchen, the radio low and cheerful, the thump of a wooden spoon against a mixing bowl. This one began with the quiet tick of the radiator in my apartment, and the kind of grey light that makes a man wonder if the day forgot to wake up. I shaved carefully, put on the only sport coat that still fit my shoulders, and wrapped a pecan pie in a towel as if it were something fragile I could protect with enough gentleness. It was Emily's recipe, though the crust would never behave for me the way it had for her. Some things listen to one pair of hands and no other. Richard's house sits at the edge of their cul-de-sac, brick and beige, a flag out front that only comes down in storms. By the time I pulled into the curb, SUVs were already lining the street like tidy soldiers. Warmth spilled from his windows. Light, laughter, television noise turned up a little too loud. I stood on the porch a moment longer than I should have, the pie cooling in my hands, and told myself I was here because family shows up. My breath fogged in the cold. When the door opened, the smell of sage and butter traveled out to meet me before any hello did. "Ed," Richard said, filling the doorway with the smile he uses at work functions. "You made it." "I live 10 minutes away," I said, stepping in. "Not exactly a trek." "Still," he answered, stepping aside and patting my shoulder like I was a friendly delivery. "We've got everything under control. You can just relax." He took the pie without looking at it and disappeared down the hall. Coats piled on a bench near the entry, none of them mine. Voices from the den rose and fell over the play-by-play of a football game. I stood there a beat too long and then followed the noise the way a man follows the sound of running water in the woods. Sarah sat on the arm of the big sectional, hair tucked into a knit beanie, though the house was warm, thumbs flying over her phone. Daniel's long legs were crossed at the ankle, his eyes on a tablet running highlights from a game I did not understand, his headphones half on in a way that said conversation could be tolerated in an emergency. Lily was on the rug with markers spread like a burst of color, drawing a house that looked suspiciously like this one. When they were little, they'd run to the door for me. Today, they barely glanced up. "Hey, kiddo," I said to Lily, keeping my voice light. "That a Thanksgiving turkey or a spaceship?" She didn't look up. "It's a house," she said, as if that explained everything. "Grandad," Sarah added, thumb still moving. "There's a charger by the lamp if you need it." I did not need a charger. I needed, well, I am not sure what I needed exactly. A place to put my hands, a voice who remembered the sound of my name, a small person twisting out of a sweater, laughing, asking me to help. Emily's photograph sat on the mantel, her smile caught in a summer we'd never have again. Someone had tucked a sprig of eucalyptus into the corner of the frame. For a few seconds, I could almost convince myself she was in the other room, muttering to herself about oven temperatures, asking me to move the roasting pan, telling me to stop sneaking pecans. The ache that followed was familiar. Grief is a tenant who pays on time and never moves out. "Watch your step there, Ed." Richard's voice rose from the kitchen. "Floors slick." We mopped. I stepped into the kitchen anyway, drawn by the small chance to be useful. It was bright, new appliances reflecting overhead lights, the island crowded with bowls that hadn't existed in my daughter's first apartment. Richard was basting the turkey like he was running a board meeting. A younger cousin I didn't recognize was arranging crudités into a shape that wanted to be a wreath. The recipe box, Emily's old tin one with the dented lid, sat half buried under a parade of glossy magazines open to pages none of us needed. A corner of an index card peeked out from beneath, flour-stained, pale blue lines, her handwriting leaning forward, as if it were in a hurry to finish the sentence. "I brought the pie," I said, setting it gently by the stove. "Emily always said it needed to rest." Richard glanced at it. "We've got a pecan from Green's Bakery," he said. "But yours can be backup. We're doing a spread. More options is better, right?" His grin apologetically widened. "Oh, and don't fuss with the gravy. I've got it dialed in. Options, dialed in." I nodded like a reasonable man and took a step back to keep from knocking anything over. He was careful to move around me rather than with me, like a dancer who had practiced the steps without a partner. I tried not to take offense at a choreography I had not been invited to learn. Laughter from the den rose again. The announcer called a play that meant something to everyone but me. When I turned, Daniel was at my elbow for exactly long enough to say, "Wi-Fi password's the same if you need it," which made me smile in spite of myself. "I think I'll risk life unplugged today," I said. "Suit yourself," he replied, already halfway gone. I found my way to the dining room, the table stretched to its full length, leaves locked in place. A white cloth hung to the floor. Emily's good plates gleamed, the ones with the delicate green rim she'd found at a church rummage sale when she was 24 and delighted like a child for a week. Place cards sat at each setting in Sarah's neat block letters. There was a seat with my name, and next to it a second chair pulled slightly out of line. Flowered cushion faded in the pattern of a woman who used to sit there. Emily's chair. No card there, of course. She needed none. The cushion had flattened in the shape of memory, and for a moment I stood with my hand on the back of that chair, the way a man might touch a headstone he visits too often. Don't stand in doorways, my father used to tell me. Pick a room and belong to it. It's harder advice than it sounds. Grandad. Sarah had walked in without me seeing her. She had a glass pitcher in her hands, and the look of someone doing 3 tasks at once. Can you do me a favor and put napkins at each place? Mom always did it, but she cut herself off, eyes darting toward the mantel down the hall. I'm behind. Of course, I said, grateful to be asked. Work is the best antidote I know for feeling superfluous. I folded the linen in the way Emily had liked, simple rectangles, nothing fancy, and placed one by each plate, smoothing the edges like you smooth the hair of a sleeping child. My fingers remembered the motion all on their own. Out in the kitchen, Richard's voice carried like a radio tuned just a little too loud. Guys, phone's away at the table tonight, okay? Let's be present. Then, lower to someone I couldn't see. Ed tends to get into stories. Just nod. We've had enough of those this year. I paused with a napkin in my hands and stared at nothing for a long beat. I could feel the old anger stretch like something waking up from a nap. Then I set the napkin down where it belonged and kept moving. There are truths you swallow because the room cannot hold them yet. Guests kept arriving, neighbors, Richard's sister with her twins, a cousin from Minneapolis with a laugh that could tile a roof. Each time the door opened, the house inhaled cold air and exhaled new introductions. Some people hugged me because they had always hugged me. Others shook my hand and said it was good to see me, like it was a courtesy they had dug out of a drawer they rarely used. I told myself none of it mattered and found another stack of napkins to fold. We gathered finally, called by that old chorus of clinking forks and someone saying, "Grace, my Grace," not the kind at the beginning of meals. She stood by my chair, a hand on my shoulder, and for a moment I felt anchored. Lily slid into her seat, scooting hers closer to Sarah's without a glance at mine. Daniel took the chair across from Richard. It was a small geography that said a great deal about alliances. Richard lifted his glass. "To family," he said, "to new traditions, to the ones we miss." His eyes flicked to the mantel with the practiced solemnity of a man who has rehearsed how long to look sad. "To Emily," I said without standing, because if I stood I was not sure what my legs would do. "For every good thing in this room." There was a murmur of agreement that felt thinner than it should have. Plates passed, bowls passed, voices rose and fell, and in the middle of all that motion, the smallest distance opened around me like a small ring of air no one stepped into. I asked Daniel about school and got a 2-syllable answer. I asked Sarah about her college applications and got a nod that meant later. I asked Lily about her drawing and she said, "It's fine," without lifting her eyes. The ring held. At one point Richard reached past me for the gravy boat rather than ask me to pass it, and I realized it was not thoughtlessness, it was a choreography that did not include me. I ate anyway, because you have to eat, because the body remains boringly practical even when the heart is busy breaking. A scrap of conversation reached me from the far end of the table. Richard's sister asking how we'd handle Christmas this year without Emily, whether we'd finally simplify. Richard laughed softly. "We're streamlining," he said. "Less fuss." He did not look at me when he said it, but the word landed in my chest like a pebble finding a well. When the noise swelled, I let my eyes wander down the hall to the kitchen. The old tin recipe box sat open now, index cards fanned like a hand of cards at a table I had been asked to leave. I could see her handwriting from where I sat, the way she'd underlined the word rest under pies, as if the crust needed to be told twice. I did not stand. I did not walk down the hall to slide my thumb along the edge of the card that still smelled like cinnamon if you believed hard enough. I stayed put and answered a question from a cousin about the weather, like it was a test I intended to pass. After dessert, Green's Bakery's perfect lattice and my pie demoted to a corner where only children ventured. Lily stood and announced she was full. She hugged Sarah, kissed Richard's cheek, and when she reached my chair she paused. For a second, she looked at me like a child looks at a lighthouse across a dark place. I smiled without showing teeth. She hesitated, then slid sideways and wrapped her arms around the dog instead. The ring of air widened. Dishes started. Football returned, coats went back on, people hugged in doorways and said lovely empty things about doing this again soon. I helped stack plates until Richard took them out of my hands. Careful there, Ed, they're the good ones, and gave me a job stirring coffee, which didn't need stirring. When I tired of being useful to no purpose, I found my coat and stood quietly by the front door, watching my breath fog the glass. "Are you leaving already?" Sarah asked, more politeness than worry. "Long day," I said. "I'll get out of your hair." "Grandad," she said, fiddling with her phone case. "Thanks for coming." I wanted to say, "I have always come." Through fevers and field trips, through leaky roofs and late bills, through the kind of nights when one voice in the house needs a second to keep it from breaking. Instead, I said, "Me too," because that was what the room could hold. On the porch, night had settled deeper. The air smelled like chimney smoke and wet leaves. I stood there with my keys in my hand and realized I had not heard my daughter's laugh in that house in over a year, and somehow the silence had started to believe it owned the place. I turned back, intending to say one more goodbye, to Lily maybe, to the dog if no one else would do. That was when I saw it, through the window, on the counter by the stove, the tin recipe box with the dented lid. The corner of a folded paper stuck out from beneath a stack of cards. The edges were worn from fingers that had handled it more than once. On the outside, in Emily's hand, were 3 words. "Read this first." I did not walk back in then, not because I didn't want to, but because some things ask you to arrive the right way. I put my hand flat against the cool glass of the door and felt the old ache stir, but this time it moved with a thread of something else wound through it. Purpose, maybe, or the beginning of a map. On the drive home, the streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that lives in between holidays. Streetlights threw long fences of light across the pavement. I kept seeing the empty chair at the table, the faded cushion, the ring of air around my own place, and the dented lid of that box. By the time I hung my coat on its hook, I knew what I would do. I would come early tomorrow, before football and laughter filled the rooms, before the choreography told me where not to stand. I would find Emily's handwriting and whatever it had been brave enough to carry forward. Some meals begin without you. Sometimes you have to set your own place. The next morning, the pie dish sat empty on my counter, only a few crumbs left clinging to the glass. I scraped them into the sink, rinsed the pan, and wondered who, if anyone, had actually eaten it. Maybe Lily had snuck a bite. Maybe some cousin who didn't know the difference between Green's Bakery and a crust shaped by Emily's recipe. Either way, the effort felt invisible, swallowed by a room too loud to notice what one old man brought. I told myself not to brood. It was only pie. But brooding has a way of planting its flag where you least expect it. By late afternoon, I found myself back in Richard's neighborhood. My boots crunched against gravel, still damp from yesterday's rain. The air had that brittle November edge to it, a smell of frost settling into soil. Cars lined the drive again. He had turned Thanksgiving into a 2-day parade of guests, each wave louder than the one before. I might have turned back if not for the weight of that recipe box pulling at my thoughts. When Richard opened the door, his smile was thinner than yesterday's, but no less practiced. "Back again, Ed? Didn't expect to see you tonight." "I left something," I lied, brushing past him before he could object. "Didn't want to trouble anyone later." The kitchen was alive with voices. Richard's sister was plating leftovers, chattering about discounts at the mall. A couple of neighbors laughed near the stove, retelling the same story twice in a row. No one noticed me slip toward the counter. The tin box sat there still, half buried beneath magazines. My hand trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, beneath cards smudged with flour and oil, lay the folded sheet I'd glimpsed through the window. The edges had softened, corners bent as if read many times. "Read this first," the front declared, Emily's slanting script more familiar to me than my own. My breath caught. "Looking for something?" Richard's voice cut through my reverie. He was closer now, a wine glass in hand. I slid the paper back under the stack, closed the lid gently. "Just checking the recipes. Thought I might borrow one." "You and that old box," he said, a small laugh under his words. "Emily loved it. Sure, but we've got everything digitized now. Times change. They don't for everything," I answered. My tone was sharper than intended, but I didn't soften it. He studied me for a beat too long before clapping my shoulder. "Don't worry, Ed. We've got it handled. You should relax. Let the kids enjoy their holiday." Handled. That word again. It lodged in me like a splinter. Later, at the table, the whispers started. I heard them even when I wasn't meant to. Richard telling his cousin that I was set in my ways. His sister suggesting gently that maybe I shouldn't drive after dark anymore. A neighbor asking in a half-whisper, does he live alone now? Must be hard. They spoke like I wasn't 3 chairs away, like I had already drifted into some quiet corner of irrelevance. Sarah passed the potatoes without looking at me. Daniel asked his father if they could go to the mall tomorrow, and Richard said yes before I'd even opened my mouth to offer a ride. Lily doodled on her napkin, eyes down, chewing too quickly. Every so often someone remembered to include me. How's your garden, Ed? Or still keeping busy? But the questions felt like scraps tossed across a fence, not real conversation. My answers were brief, not because I didn't have more to say, but because no one lingered long enough to hear them. Emily's photo watched from the mantel again, eucalyptus still tucked in the frame. I stared at it when the voices grew too loud, asking her silently what she had left in that folded paper. Why mark it so boldly? Read this first, and then leave it buried among recipes for casseroles and cookies. Dinner wound down with the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of coats. Guests filtered out into the cold. I lingered, waiting for a quiet moment, but Richard hovered near the kitchen, his body a gatekeeper's presence. The recipe box remained out of reach. As I stepped onto the porch, Sarah brushed past me, earbuds already in place. Well, night, Grandad, she said, distracted, pulling her jacket tight. Night, sweetheart, I replied, but she was halfway down the steps before the words reached her. The air bit sharp, streetlights glowed halos in the mist. My car keys felt heavy in my hand. I stood there longer than I should have, staring back at the warm windows. Inside that house were whispers I wasn't meant to hear, seats I wasn't meant to fill, truths I wasn't meant to touch, but Emily's handwriting had survived years and grief to reach me. Whatever she had written was waiting still, and next time I would not leave without it. The third evening came heavy with November chill, the kind that creeps into bones even under a coat. I carried a covered dish out of habit, though I suspected it would sit untouched like the pie. Richard opened the door, all charm again, his voice rising above the noise of television and clinking glasses. Ed, come in. We're just about to sit down. The dining room table stretched long under the light, its cloth freshly ironed, plates glinting. At one end, Richard presided with the casual authority of a man who liked the sound of his own voice. Beside him, Sarah scrolled on her phone until he tapped her wrist. Daniel leaned on one elbow, earbuds dangling from his neck. Lily swung her legs beneath her chair, half smiling at her doodle on a napkin. I lowered myself into my seat and immediately felt the ring of air around me again, a space no one crossed. Across from me, Daniel nodded in acknowledgement but returned to his phone before I could ask how school was. Sarah didn't look up until Richard cleared his throat and reminded her, phone's away. Even then she slipped it into her pocket like someone hiding a secret. Grace was said quickly, Richard's voice moving through the words like a checklist. Platters began their slow rotation down the table. Turkey, mashed potatoes, beans, stuffing. Forks clinked, chairs scraped, voices rose, but none of them turned in my direction. I tried to begin small. Sarah, I heard you've been working on college applications. Big decisions, huh? Yeah, she said, polite, eyes on her plate. Got any schools in mind? I pressed, leaning forward slightly. She gave a half shrug. A few. That was the end of it. Daniel's turn. Football season's almost over, isn't it? He said, not unkind, but without looking up. And how's your team doing? Okay. It was like trying to draw water from a stone, each word a trickle. My chest tightened. I looked to Lily, the youngest, my last refuge of honesty. That drawing yesterday, did you finish it? She smiled faintly. It's at home. Then she tucked her head down, shoulders tight as if she'd said too much already. The table roared around me, laughter rising from Richard's end as he retold a story about work. Everyone leaned toward him, their forks suspended mid-air, their faces alight with interest. I sat in the pocket of quiet at my end, chewing slowly, each bite turning to dust before it reached my throat. Once Emily would have filled that gap. She would have asked me about the shed I was repairing, or told the kids to show me their latest project, or made a joke sharp enough to slice through Richard's posturing. Without her, the silence pressed harder, a curtain pulled between me and the people on the other side. I caught Sarah's eyes briefly. For half a second she seemed about to speak. Then Richard laughed again, louder this time, and she turned toward him instead. I rested my fork, the food blurred on my plate. My daughter's picture on the mantel seemed to watch, her smile frozen midsummer. I wondered if she would have recognized this meal, this cold parody of togetherness. After dessert was served, Richard reached across me for the whipped cream without asking. His sleeve brushed my glass, tilting it enough to spill a line of water across the cloth. He didn't notice. I dabbed at it with my napkin, and no one thanked me for saving the spread from a stain. Conversation drifted again, orbiting around Richard like planets circling a sun. I was the empty chair in their galaxy, present but unnecessary. I found myself glancing again at the kitchen. The tin recipe box still sat near the stove, lid dented, corners worn. That folded note waited beneath the stack of cards, its message still hidden. I could almost hear Emily's voice telling me, "Not yet. Not like this." So I swallowed the words gathering in my chest. I let the silence cover me like a second tablecloth, and I promised myself next time the meal would not stay this quiet. The house was quieter the following afternoon. The crowd had thinned. Most of Richard's visitors had gone back to their cities and their sales, their chatter and perfume lingering only in the air. I arrived earlier than usual, a casserole dish in hand, because showing up empty felt like surrender. Richard looked surprised when he opened the door. "Ed," he said, his voice a shade cooler without the audience of cousins and friends. "You didn't need to come by today. We've got more leftovers than we know what to do with." "I won't stay long," I answered, stepping past him. "Just thought I'd see the kids for a bit." His mouth pressed into something that might have been a smile, but it didn't travel to his eyes. He shrugged, then returned to the kitchen. The children were scattered across the house, Sarah upstairs with earbuds in, Daniel at the den TV with a video game, Lily on the rug again with her markers. She looked up when I entered, her expression open for once. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly. That small greeting warmed something in me that had been cold too long. I sat near her. "What are you drawing today?" She tilted her paper so I could see, a tree with wide branches, leaves tumbling down like rain. "It's our backyard," she explained. "Mum used to sit under it." The mention of Emily was like a sudden breath of spring in a winter room. I swallowed against the ache. "She loved that tree," I said. "Planted it herself, back when you were little." Lily nodded solemnly, then bent back over her drawing. Richard's voice carried from the kitchen. "Dinner's at 6, Ed. Don't make plans, huh?" It was phrased like a courtesy, but landed like a command. I stood, making my way to the kitchen under the guise of setting down my dish. The counter was cluttered as always, and there, half hidden behind a stack of cookbooks, sat the tin recipe box again. The dented lid caught the light, as if it had been waiting. Richard was fiddling with the oven, his back turned. My heart thumped harder than it should have for such a simple act. I slid the box closer, opened the lid quietly, and there it was, the folded paper, edges softened by time, Emily's handwriting bold across the front. "Read this first." My hands shook as I unfolded it. The letter began with my name, Dad. Already my eyes blurred. I read on, silently mouthing her words. She wrote of childhood memories, the way I had carried her on my shoulders at the fair, the late nights I stayed awake helping with school projects, the times I said no when she asked for things we couldn't afford, but yes, when it came to books and learning. She remembered the smell of sawdust from my workshop, the sound of my whistle when I came home from long shifts. Then her tone shifted. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say everything I wanted before I left. I need you to know how much you mean to me, and I need my children to know it too. They might forget, especially if voices around them drown out mine. Please don't let them. Remind them of the man who raised me, who taught me strength and kindness. Don't let them see you as anything less than the heart of this family." Tears blurred the ink. Her words struck with a force greater than any rebuke or praise I'd ever known. "Ed," Richard's voice came suddenly sharp from behind me. I snapped the paper closed, slipping it into my coat pocket. The box clattered softly as I set it back. "What are you doing?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "Just looking for a recipe," I said evenly. "Emily's pumpkin bread." His gaze lingered too long, suspicion coiled behind it. Finally, he gave a dismissive wave. "That old thing? Outdated. You should have asked me. I've got better ones printed." I nodded, hiding the tremor in my hands. At dinner, the table buzzed with the usual noise, Richard's stories, Sarah's quiet replies, Daniel's shrugs, Lily's doodles. But in my pocket lay Emily's voice, her truth, her plea. The letter burned against my chest like a coal. Every laugh around the table sounded distant, every word from Richard hollow. because I knew now that Emily had trusted me to carry her voice into this silence, and sooner or later I would. That night I lay awake long after the lights of the neighborhood went out. Emily's letter burned in my mind, her words circling like a hymn I couldn't silence. Don't let them see you as anything less than the heart of this family. I whispered the line to myself more than once, tasting its weight. She had believed in me even when I'd begun to feel like a ghost in my own bloodline. By morning I knew only one thing. I couldn't let her voice stay folded in my pocket forever. The children deserved to hear her, whether Richard liked it or not. I arrived that evening with no dish in my hands, no excuse to offer. Richard opened the door with a glance that was more irritation than welcome. "Ed," he said, his voice clipped. "Back again? We were just sitting down." "Then I'll join you," I answered, brushing past before he could set a condition. The dining room was quieter than usual, but the same gulf remained. Sarah at one end, tapping her phone until Richard gave her a sharp look. Daniel half distracted by a video game he'd paused only because his father demanded it. Lily bent over her sketchbook again, coloring furiously, her small shoulders tense. I took my seat, heart thrumming against the folded letter in my pocket. "How was everyone's day?" I asked, forcing brightness. "Fine," Sarah murmured. "School, same." Daniel gave a half shrug, his eyes on the table. Nothing new. Even Lily, who usually managed some warmth, only nodded without looking up. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was heavy, deliberate, the kind that makes a man feel invisible in plain sight. I tried again. "Lily, did you finish your drawing from yesterday? The tree?" She didn't raise her eyes. "Yeah." Richard chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as he carved another slice of turkey. "Kids these days, they don't care for small talk, Ed. Different world. Different world. Different family." I tightened my grip on my fork. "Maybe they would," I said slowly, "if anyone taught them to value conversation." His eyes flicked toward me, cool and dismissive. "Or maybe we just let them be who they are." The words pressed against my chest. "Remind them of the man who raised me." Emily's plea echoed louder than Richard's smugness. But I stayed silent. Not yet. Not like this. Dinner droned on, Richard carrying the conversation, the children orbiting his words like planets bound to one sun. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt the air tighten, the invisible wall rise higher. Halfway through, Sarah excused herself to take a call. Daniel followed with the excuse of homework. Even Lily slipped away to her room, clutching her sketchbook to her chest like a shield. I was left staring across the table at Richard, who leaned back with his glass of wine, watching me with that same measuring gaze. "You come around a lot lately," he said after a long sip. "It's noticeable." "Emily wanted me close," I answered simply. "Emily's gone." His tone was flat, final. "We're building new traditions now." The silence between us stretched, thick and dangerous. I could have thrown the letter onto the table right then, forced him to hear her words. But something in me resisted. Emily deserved more than a petty argument. Her voice needed to arrive when the house was listening, so I rose without another word. I collected my coat from the hook and stepped into the night air. As I walked to my car, I pulled the letter out once more, unfolding its creases in the glow of a street lamp. Emily's handwriting steadied me. "Don't let them forget who you are." Ignored again, but not for long. Because the next time I sat at that table, the silence would not belong to Richard. It would belong to her. I woke before dawn, the kind of waking that feels more like being pulled up out of deep water than any restful sleep. The apartment was dark, the radiator groaning against the chill. On the nightstand sat the letter, unfolded from the night before. I'd left it there, unwilling to tuck it away again, afraid that hiding it might weaken its power. I read it twice more in the dim light, my daughter's words steadying me like a hand on my shoulder. "Don't let them see you as anything less than the heart of this family." Every sentence was both balm and burden. She had trusted me to carry her voice, but I hadn't spoken it yet. Each meal I sat through in silence felt like a betrayal of her trust. All morning I weighed the choice. If I read the letter aloud, Richard would fume, maybe even try to laugh it off. The children might resist, uncomfortable at being forced into a moment they hadn't chosen. But if I stayed silent, they might never know who their mother believed me to be. By the time evening fell, I had made my decision. When I arrived at the house, Richard's expression told me he wasn't thrilled to see me again. Still, he moved aside, gesturing stiffly. "We're eating soon," he said. The dining room was already set. Sarah was scrolling on her phone, her hair curtaining her face. Daniel half listened to Richard, who was talking about a promotion at work, while Lily bent over another drawing, coloring furiously. I slid into my chair, the letter heavy in my coat pocket. I touched it once, as if to remind myself it was real. Dinner began in the usual rhythm. Food passed around, Richard carrying the conversation like a man hosting his own radio show. I tried to engage, ask Sarah about her classes, Daniel about his game, Lily about her drawing. Each answered quickly, politely, but then turned away. The distance between us remained. Midway through the meal, I cleared my throat. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I have something I'd like to share." Richard glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Now, we're eating." "Yes," I said. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers brushing the folded paper. "It won't take long." The children paused, forks in hand. For once their eyes shifted toward me, curiosity breaking through the indifference. Even Richard leaned back, wary but listening. I pulled the letter out and set it on the table beside my plate. My pulse hammered in my ears. "This," I said, my voice steadier now, "is a letter your mother wrote before she passed. She wanted you to hear it." Sarah's phone stilled in her hand. Daniel straightened. Lily's eyes widened, her marker rolling off the table unnoticed. Richard's jaw tightened. "Ed, maybe this isn't the time." But I raised a hand. "Emily asked me not to let her voice be forgotten, and tonight I'm going to honor that." The words hung heavy over the table. The children leaned in, a silent hunger in their eyes I hadn't seen in years. I unfolded the paper slowly, smoothing the creases with trembling hands. My eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, and I drew in a breath. The decision was made. Tomorrow would not be another silent meal. Tonight, Emily would speak again. The letter lay unfolded on the white tablecloth, the inked lines trembling faintly under the weight of my hand. For a moment the room seemed to shrink around it. Forks were lowered, glasses half raised, children leaning forward in silence. Only Richard broke the stillness, his chair scraping softly as he shifted. "Ed," he said, his voice too smooth, too casual. "This isn't necessary. The kids don't need to relive the past tonight. We're building new traditions." My eyes stayed on the letter. "Emily is not the past. She is their mother. Her words matter." He gave a quick, dismissive laugh. "They're kids. They'll remember her in their own way. Let's not drag dinner into—" "Enough," I said, louder than I meant. The word startled even me, but it stopped him mid-sentence. Sarah's eyes lifted fully from her phone, for once focused on me. Daniel set down his fork, the clink sharp against the plate. Lily sat frozen, marker still in her hand, staring as though I had become someone new. I held the paper higher, the creases soft beneath my fingers. "Your mother wrote this for you. She wanted you to hear it. I've waited long enough." Richard opened his mouth again, but I raised my voice, stronger now. "You'll listen too." The first words left me trembling. "Dad," the letter began, but I spoke them aloud. She called me Dad. She remembered the nights I carried her on my shoulders, the times I stayed awake to help her with school projects, the way I worked double shifts so she could have books. Sarah's lips parted, a sound caught in her throat. Daniel leaned closer, elbows on the table. I read on, my voice steadier with each line. She said, "I need my children to know how much you mean to me. They might forget, especially if voices around them drown out mine." Richard shifted again, his jaw tightening. "Ed," I pressed forward. She begged me not to let that happen. "Remind them of the man who raised me, who taught me strength and kindness. Don't let them see you as anything less than the heart of this family." The words filled the room, heavier than any sermon, sharper than any blade. Silence followed, so deep it rang in my ears. Lily was the first to move, her marker rolled off the table unnoticed. As she whispered, "She wrote that." "Yes," I said softly, every word. Daniel swallowed hard. She wanted us to know? She trusted me to tell you," I replied. Sarah's phone slipped from her hand onto the table with a dull thud. She wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to hide it. Richard exhaled through his nose, leaning back. "Letters are emotional. People say things they don't always mean. It doesn't change the present, Ed. We're doing fine." I turned on him then, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You think ignoring me honors Emily? You think treating me like furniture builds family?" She wanted her children to know where they come from, to know who I am. And tonight, they heard her voice. The room quivered with tension. The children looked between us, their silence heavy with awakening. Richard's authority, for once, seemed to falter under the weight of a woman who wasn't even there. The confrontation had begun, and there was no going back. I gripped the paper with both hands, afraid that if I let go, the silence in the room would swallow it whole. The children sat motionless, their plates forgotten, their eyes locked on me as if hearing their mother's voice through mine. Richard leaned back in his chair, arms folded, watching with the smug detachment of a man who believed he still held control. But he didn't. Not anymore. I cleared my throat and began again, letting Emily's words carry me. Sarah, Daniel and Lily. If your grandfather is reading this, it means I couldn't tell you everything myself. I need you to know what kind of man he is. When I was your age, I didn't understand the sacrifices he made. I just knew that when I needed him, he was always there. He worked until his hands ached, but still found the strength to listen to my dreams. He told me I could be anything, even when the world laughed. He showed me that kindness is stronger than pride, and that family is worth every cost. My voice cracked, but I forced myself forward. Sarah's eyes glistened, her lip trembling as she pressed her phone face down on the table. Daniel leaned in, frowning in concentration, as though memorizing every word. Lily clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles pale, tears standing bright in her young eyes. I looked down again and read on. I fear that when I'm gone, you'll forget the stories, the nights, the laughter. I fear you'll only hear the voices that tell you to look past him, to see him as someone who belongs to another time. Don't let that happen. Don't let anyone make you think he is less. He is the reason I became who I am. Without him, I would not have had the strength to love you the way I do. A sob caught in Lily's throat, sharp and sudden. Sarah reached over, placing a trembling hand on her sister's arm. Daniel's face hardened, but his eyes brimmed. I steadied my hands and finished. Promise me, children, hold on to your grandfather, listen to him, learn from him, because one day, when you're older, you'll realize that the stories he carries are your stories too, and they will be all you have left of me. The last words fell into the room like stones into still water, rippling outward in a silence that felt infinite. I lowered the letter to my lap, my breath unsteady, my chest aching with both grief and release. Richard shifted, his voice low and cutting. It's just sentiment. People romanticize when they're dying. Don't put too much weight on it. I looked at him, my voice sharper than steel. Those are not just words. That was Emily's voice, her truth, and if you can't respect it, at least don't dare silence it. His lips pressed tight, his eyes flicking away as though he feared the weight of 3 pairs of young eyes now staring at him. Sarah's voice broke the silence, small but firm. She wanted us to listen. We should have listened. Daniel nodded, his throat working. We didn't know. Lily slid from her chair, circling the table. She threw her arms around me, burying her face against my chest. Her small body shook with sobs. I held her tightly, Emily's letter still clutched in my other hand. Across the table, Sarah wiped at her tears, and Daniel looked at me with something new, something that looked like respect, or maybe recognition. The letter had been read, the silence broken, and for the first time in years, the house felt like it belonged to Emily again. Lily's sobs quieted slowly against my chest, her little fingers clutching my shirt as though afraid I might slip away too. I stroked her hair, murmuring soft words, though I wasn't sure if she could even hear them through her tears. Across the table, Sarah dabbed at her cheeks with a napkin, her expression tight with guilt. Daniel sat rigid, arms folded, his jaw working as though he was trying to swallow something jagged. Richard cleared his throat, his voice louder now, forcing authority back into the room. All right, that's enough. Emily was emotional. She wrote things to make her father feel better, not to put responsibility on all of us. The kids don't need this guilt. But the children didn't turn toward him. Sarah lifted her gaze, meeting mine first. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. Grandpa, I didn't know she felt that way. I didn't know she wanted us to. She broke off, glancing at Richard, then back at me. I'm sorry we ignored you. The words hit me harder than I expected. Apologies from children carry a purity grown-ups forget how to summon. My throat tightened. You have nothing to apologize for, Sarah. You only needed someone to remind you of who your mother was, and who I am to you. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but steady. Mum trusted you. If she wanted us to know, then we should have listened a long time ago. Richard snapped his gaze to him. Daniel, don't let this cloud your judgment. You've got a future ahead. College, sports, opportunities. You don't need to be dragged backward. Backward. Daniel's tone sharpened, surprising even me. You think Mum's voice is backward. You think listening to her is a waste of time. Richard faltered, opening his mouth, then closing it again. The confidence that usually wrapped around him like armor seemed to crack at the edges. Lily pulled back from me, her small face streaked with tears, but set with fierce determination. Mum wanted us to listen. You can't tell us not to. Richard's hand tightened around his glass, knuckles white. Children don't always understand what's best. They understand love. I cut in, my voice steady, stronger than it had been in years, and Emily gave them enough of it to know when it's being twisted or denied. Sarah squared her shoulders, her voice firmer now. We're not ignoring him anymore. Daniel nodded sharply. Yeah, Mum wanted him here. That means something. That means everything. The room had shifted. The balance of power, so long in Richard's hands, slipped away like sand through a clenched fist. He stared at the three faces across from him, his children, no longer under his shadow, but illuminated by their mother's words. For the first time, he looked small in his own home. I folded Emily's letter gently, tucking it back into my pocket. My hand lingered there, pressing it close to my heart. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was purposeful. It was change taking root. The turning point had come, not with anger, but with truth, Emily's truth. And nothing would be the same again. The dining room held a new kind of quiet, one that pulsed with awareness rather than absence. For years I had sat at this table like a shadow, tolerated but never embraced. Tonight Emily's voice had filled that void, and the echoes of her words still lingered in every corner of the room. Richard set down his glass with deliberate force, the sound sharp against the table. "All right," he said, his tone controlled but fraying. "You've had your moment, but let's not forget. I'm the one keeping this house together. I pay the bills, I make the decisions, what I say goes." Sarah straightened in her chair, her voice calm but firm. "Mum's letter said Grandpa is the heart of this family. You don't get to erase that." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You're too young to understand what it takes to run a household." Daniel leaned forward, his jaw set. "We understand enough. Mum trusted him. If you can't respect that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't understand what this family really is." Lily, still clutching my arm, whispered fiercely, "We want Grandpa here, always." The words were small, but they landed with more power than Richard's entire tirade. His face flushed, his authority cracking in front of his own children. He opened his mouth, searching for the right rebuke, but nothing came. The silence after Lily's declaration was deafening, his dominance broken by the smallest voice at the table. I reached into my pocket, pulling Emily's letter out one last time. I set it in the center of the table where all could see. "This is your mother's truth, not mine, not Richard's, hers. If you ever forget, you read this again. And remember that she asked me to be here for you. I won't fail her." Sarah's hand covered the paper protectively. Daniel nodded, his eyes fierce. Lily leaned into me, her small frame trembling but resolute. Richard looked at the three of them, then at me, and for the first time his confidence collapsed. He leaned back, defeated, his shoulders slumping as the realization sank in. His voice no longer controlled the room. Emily's did, through me, through her children. The revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was silence broken at last. The silence that had smothered me for years at this table was shattered by a letter, by a mother's love, by children who finally remembered who I was. As I rose from my chair, Lily's hand still gripping mine, I looked around the table and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Belonging. Emily's words had brought me back, and no one, least of all Richard, could take that away again. The heart of the family was beating once more, and it would never be silenced again.